Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, Easy Learn channel. Thank you so much for taking your time to listen to this. At least thank you so much, and I know that you will be able to understand. Here we make things easier for students to understand. So let's get to chapter 3 of this book. Chapter 3 is a little bit long because it has several parts, but it has 7 main parts. So let me make it easier for you to understand. Let's start with the first part. The first part starts like this. Professor Kimani studied at Oxford University as a lecturer. Once he was done with his studies, immediately he got an opportunity as a senior lecturer to the University of Nairobi. He went to the university, and after a few months, he launched a noisy debate in which he demanded that the University of Nairobi should for relevance to the society rather than simply excellence to its work. This led to the change of the university's motto to being relevance to the society. After winning this war, he started another war which was even noisier. In this war, he was demanding that the university should be an agent of change rather than a mere spectator of it. People thought that this motion that he started was less radical, but he did not care because his antics in the war had won him the heart of a campus beauty queen whose name was Asia Omondi, and they got married. So this part is all about Professor Kimani going to Oxford University, then becoming a senior lecturer at the University of Nairobi, then starting of his motions, where the first one was successful because the motto was changed, and then finally it ends with us knowing that he married Asia Omondi, who was a beauty queen at the campus. Yes. So let's get to the next part of the chapter. The next part is taking place at an ice cream store in Nairobi. So Tony, the daughter to Professor Kimani, and the dad, Professor Kimani, are both in an ice cream store in Nairobi, where they are taking ice cream as they debated on how Africa's economy was and how donors demanded so much from Africans so that they would help them. What donors did was to gang up on Africa and told Africans that unless they made changes on some few things, they would not receive aid from them. Africans had no choice but to do as they had been instructed, since the donors did well to remain tough. Are we together? Yes, I hope we are. But now these words. Professor Kimani is the one who is talking to Tony and telling her how donors were harassing Africans so that they would still continue to help them. So this is how the part continues. But after this, the Africans had to recover the much time they felt they had lost, and therefore the parliamentarians started off by staging a coup. Professor Kimani explained to her daughter Tony that before he started teaching, professors earned more than the MPs. But after the coup, they now earn 100 times more than the lecturers do. Also, he explained that professors earn their salaries and they are taxed, but MPs are not taxed. You know why? He explained to her daughter, Tuni, that MPs MPs are lawmakers, so they can decide anytime to change any law, and they can earn more and more. Even if Africans go for elections, even if MPs are changed, the fact remains that they are lawmakers and they can change laws and they can earn more and more money as they wish. The next part, the third part, I told you that there are 7 main parts. So the next part is taking place in Professor Kimani's home as they are taking their supper. So they are talking about safety, personal safety, workplace safety, yeah, all about safety. So Professor Kimani starts off by him thinking into himself that guarding has become an age in Kenya, like of age in Kenya, like it's an it's an old school thing, yeah. So since all sectors including transport sector, personal safety and also workplaces, there was less or no guarding at all. Professor Kimani viewed it as a failure of the state, but his daughter Tuni held a more practical view. Since that day Tuni had attended a seminar on personal safety. So Tuni is asking her parents what personal safety meant and if it was the role of the state. And then she asked the two what would happen if the state cannot be able to provide the required safety to its citizens. But Professor Kimani is arguing. Professor Kimani added that this was a requirement by the state. Okay? So if the state cannot provide it, then Asia added that then it would be a private matter where everybody is taking care of themselves, like hiring bodyguards, hiring their own personnel, their own safety personnel, like the police, the yeah, name it. Yes. So that's the part, but also in that part, Tuni also added another point that male violence was to be dealt with. And the main reasons for feminism were three: lack of awareness of where the female are in the society, look of a weak and helpless people, like ladies or women are looked at as helpless and weak people in the society, and also temptations to stray. This part of the chapter ends as Asia gives Professor Kimani an idea of leaving the university as a lecturer and that he should become a politician, like somebody she knew, whose name was Newborn Wamoyu. Yes. The fourth part of the chapter is a little bit sad because it explains how Tuni, Professor Kimani's daughter, died in a tragic road accident when she was in a minibus and a trailer. Yeah, it was an accident that involved a trailer and a minibus, and that's where she died. Yes. So the next part, which is the fifth, yes, which is the fifth part, explains how Asia, also sad, still sad, Asia left Professor Kimani. So they started with some misunderstanding, just few misunderstandings here and there. Asia and Professor Kimani are having misunderstandings for some few months. Then Asia decides one day that he would leave Professor Kimani, whose other name is Karanja, for newborn Walomu, the MP. You remember the MP that I was mentioning to you, the one that Asia was telling Professor Kimani to leave the university to become MPS. Yes, so that's where Asia wanted to be married as a wife, yeah, to newborn Walomi, who was an MP. And after that, the next morning, Asia leaves Professor Kimani. Yeah. So the next part, Professor Kimani now decides, after Asia left, Professor Kimani the next day decides to go and talk to Newborn and just get to know why he decided to steal her wife. Yeah. So she gets to the office. So this part is taking place in Newborn's office. So he gets to the office, sees two secretaries who smiles at him, but not genuine smiles. So Professor Kimani gets to the office, sees newborn, and then they start talking and talking, but now they cannot, but now they don't agree. Yeah, they so but now a newborn Walumi never agrees to leave Asia alone because he argues that all is gold. Okay, so Professor Kimani goes to newborn Walumi's office, meets two secretaries who smile at him, gets to the office to speak to newborn. Newborn has 3 wives already and wants to add another, who was Asia. The argument ended when Professor Kimani and newborn were arrested because Professor Kimani becomes angry and goes to newborn to fight him. Then that's when they are arrested. Professor Kimani is charged because of mistreating or because of wanting to harass a member of parliament. And then Professor Kimani was then demoted by the university from being a full professor to going back to be a senior lecturer at the university. Then he was imprisoned for 6 months. After those 6 months, all that Professor Kimani was thinking was his career, just his career, and that is when that's how that part ends. We get to the next part where Professor Kimani is in his house. He heard a knock on his door and went to open it. A white man, aged 50 plus, who identifies himself as Tad Longway, enters. He was the director of special projects at AGDA. The agency was based in Cape Town, South Africa. As Longway explained to Professor Kimani, Professor Kimani let Tad in his house to explain further what he meant, because you can imagine you just have a visitor, you don't know this visitor. So he invites him to his house, and then so that he could explain further what he wanted. So he explains that it was time to change what the African leaders were doing, which was riding on the citizens' backs. That was his opinion. He argued that when leaders were being elected, they were to eradicate 3 main problems, which were poverty, ignorance, and disease. But instead, they had added more, such as corruption and impunity. But none would fight those two that they had added, because they were a benefit to them. Tad explains to Professor Kimani that he had visited him since he wanted him to be one of them as a Path Alpha traveler, since he was an idealist and had the drive and tenacity. Professor Kimani then asked, suppose he joined them, what he was required to do. And he was given 2 roles: one to go for orientation at Cape Town, then attend a summit at Gambia Banjul. But now Professor Kimani would not be allowed even to enter to that summit. But Tad explained to him that he would be given an observer, so he was not supposed to worry about anything. He thought about it, and the next day he accepted, since he was ready to go get greener pastures from another place, leave teaching without having to say goodbye. And that marks the end of chapter 3. Yeah, the next video will be chapter 4. Yes, so let me summarize on something on the 7 parts of this chapter. The first part is all about Professor Kimani and Asia Omondi getting married, and then Professor Kimani becoming a senior lecturer at University of Nairobi. The next part is about Tony and Professor Kimani at an ice cream store discussing about how Africans and donors were operating. Yeah. The next part is about Tony, Professor Kimani, and Asia, the wife, in their house discussing about safety. The next part is about how Tony, Professor Kimani's daughter, died. The next part is about Asia and Professor Kimani having misunderstandings, and then Asia leaving Professor Kimani. The next part is about Professor Kimani going to Newborn Walomi's office so that he would get his wife back, but he ends up being arrested and then being imprisoned. The next part is Professor Kimani receiving a visitor who identifies himself as Tad Longway, and then that's how Professor Kimani joined the AGDA, or the Path Alpha Summit, which was to be held in Gambia. So let's meet in the next video, chapter 4.